Okay, you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 6.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by Councilmember Kendra Brooks. Vanessa Maria Graber will discuss today's encampment sweep. And our own Lance Haver will provide an update on SEPTA's bus revolution. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you, Larry?
I'm good. It's already been a very busy week, and we're not even finished yet. So there's a lot going on, and to get us, we're going to start right on it with Vanessa Maria Graber. Vanessa, how are you?
Hello, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Larry.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for all the work you've done. And I see Oscar in the background. So let's start. Where do you want to start? With the encampment or the budget town hall?
Yeah, let's start with the Kensington sweeps.
Okay. So that happened today and did not go the way we were told it would go.
Yeah, I want to change the language a little bit because we've been calling it encampments. And that's not really what's happening there, especially since I've spent quite a bit of time visiting the actual student encampments at universities across the U.S. And what you actually have are unhoused people who are, unofficial residents of the Kensington Avenue corridor. And prior to today's sweeps, there had been several dozen people who were unhoused, living in tents, some not living in tents, who were posted up along the Kensington Avenue corridor. Today, the city planned on evacuating those people, removing them, if you will, and helping them get connected to services. Now, when we got a press release yesterday, it noted that press would not be allowed access into the area because they wanted to prioritize the safety of the people there, many of whom are experiencing addiction and other health issues. And so out of concern for their privacy, the city said that, media and other folks, members of the community should stay behind police barricades so that the outreach workers could do their job. And so that's the information that we had, that they weren't prioritizing arrests, that today's sweeps were really helping people to get connected to services, to get into treatment or housing facilities, and that they were spending the last several weeks giving people notice as part of this encampment resolution that they had 30 days to leave the area. This morning around 6:45 a.m., sanitation workers arrived to begin clearing out the area. And when they arrived, police had not yet set up a perimeter or barricades. There were some police there overnight, of course. And then later on, hundreds of police surrounded the Kensington area and moved into the Kensington Avenue corridor. This is important to note, the timing of things, because we were given a description of what was supposed to go down during the sweeps this morning, and it didn't really go as we expected. And so when the police arrived, there were still, according to outreach workers, about 2 to 3 dozen people that had not left the area yet, that were still living on the streets and had their belongings there. Like I said, some of them did have tents. Some of them just had blankets and sleeping bags and bags of clothing and other articles that belonged to them. And I spoke to members of the Up Against the Law Legal Collective. I spoke to outreach workers, harm reduction workers today, and residents of Kensington, who all gave me different descriptions of what happened. And one thing is universal, is that sanitation workers arrived first to clean up the area and began collecting people's things and putting them in garbage trucks and using leaf blowers to clean the area. Then police arrived to help people move out of the area or ask them to leave. And then the outreach workers arrived around 8:30 a.m. after most of the people had already left the area. Again, we were told that Press were not allowed in the area to allow outreach workers to talk to those people. And that didn't happen. We did not observe, by and large, the majority of those people interact with any outreach workers from the city's Office of Homeless Services. Later on throughout the day, of course, there were lingering people. Some of them did talk to the outreach workers, but the idea that those folks who remained were going to be connected to services through those outreach workers really didn't materialize. This story, again, is also being reported by the Inquirer, by Kensington Voice. I also spoke to a reporter from Unicorn Riot who showed me videos, and you can see on their Twitter and Instagram pages, of the police being the ones on the scene to escort people out of the area and ask them to leave. One of the other things that happened is that I drove around the area surrounding Kensington Avenue. I went up and down Allegheny Avenue, up and down Front Street, Ruth Street, a lot of the side streets, Clearfield, Indiana Avenue. Again, if you're from that area, it's very familiar. The whole area surrounding McPherson Square. And what I observed, and also the outreach workers that I spoke to and the members of the legal collective, were dozens and dozens of unhoused people roaming the streets with their belongings, posted up in front of different locations. Some of the people were just walking around with their things. They weren't necessarily stationary, while others were posted up in front of buildings, in front of residents, in front of churches, with nowhere else to go. It's unclear if outreach workers were able to connect with those folks, but it seems like a lot of those people left the area before police arrived because, again, they had been given notice beforehand and went to the side street areas in order to relocate. The other thing I observed on Allegheny Avenue were at least 4 to 5 dozen people experiencing addiction, again, posted up on Allegheny Avenue, where they were under the influence of drugs. Some of them were still using, even though police were on site. You could visibly see people injecting themselves. There were some outreach workers or harm reduction workers, because these were not people employed by the city, who were giving out water, who were giving out other supplies. And so it begs the question, what was the purpose of these sweeps if many of the people who were on Kensington Avenue were not actually entered into treatment facilities or housing facilities, but instead were relocated like cattle to other parts of the neighborhood? The city reports that over the last 30 days, more than 47 people were connected to treatment by their outreach workers. Adam Greer today said 18 people were connected to services. We're still looking for that data and information about the total number of people that have really been interacting with these outreach workers today, because they're still out there while we're live on the air. But
And
I think there's a lot of questions, right? In terms of what is the long-term plan for these folks who are no longer on Kensington Avenue, but now in the surrounding areas of the neighborhood.
So the city just put out a press release a couple of minutes ago, declaring today a success. This is the culmination of a 34-day process, according to the city. A total of 59 people accepted housing and services throughout the 34-day process, including 19 who came in today. And they break down the numbers according to the city. 55 people connected to housing assistance, including 3 couples. Housing assistance includes offer of low barrier shelter, and 4 people connected to drug and alcohol services. So that is where those numbers are, according to the city, as of just a few minutes ago.
Yeah, as I said, when I spoke to Sharon Gallagher, who is a communications director with the managing director's office, at the time she had said 47 people, and Adam Greer this morning, when he talked to the press, said 18. So it looks like between the hours of 10:45 a.m. and right now, in the press release drop, one more person was added to that. So we'll see if those numbers continue to increase. The city says they plan to continue having a presence along the corridor, both via the police department and outreach workers. And they plan to continue trying to engage people to connect them to services. Up Against the Law legal collective workers told me one person was arrested. They did not yet have the charge of what that was. At the budget town hall last night, Mayor Parker did say they were not prioritizing arrests, but inevitably, whenever you have that many people, especially those who are suffering from addiction, that inevitably there was likely to be arrests, but that was not the intention of the operation that was carried out this morning.
Okay. So I still have a lot of questions about this. I don't know exactly what the plan is. I don't think anybody does. Least of all city council members who are very uncertain about all of this. Today, have we learned anything new about the long-term strategy?
Yeah, it's still unclear. And before we get into the budget town hall and what was described last night, I just have two more anecdotes that I would add, which is that Up Against the Law legal collective workers reported not being allowed to enter the area to be able to observe. And in the past, when there had been sweeps of encampments and really any type of protest or freedom of assembly activities in the city of Philadelphia, they've always been able to enter those areas behind the barricades to be able to observe. They understand that they have to stay out of the police, activity and maintain their distance. But on this particular incident, they were not allowed to enter, and they report being forcibly removed from the area. They showed me video where police officers were using bikes and holding them up against their bodies to push them out of the way. So that seemed to like very concerning to me, having watched that video. The Inquirer also interviewed them where they were able to corroborate the information on a separate live video camera. And again, just the press not being allowed to be in there to observe and to understand why the outreach workers arrived so late and why the sanitation workers arrived so early. This really seems to cause a lot of confusion, not just among community members and people working in harm reduction, but also among members of city council who also arrived on the scene to see what would happen, during this operation. So there is still a lot of details that we're trying to get from members of the community who live along the corridor, who were able to observe what happened. But there is a general sentiment of concern because, again, now people.
Looks like Vanessa cut out there.
Well, she's back, but we can't
She's
hear
back. We can't hear you, Vanessa. All right. We don't have sound there for Vanessa. So let's give her a second to maybe come back in to the studio.
Because well, I just got a press release from the folks at Self Incorporated that have offered to provide services to displaced people that were taken off the street today. And I'm hoping we can get Vanessa back, because the question I have is, and I'm sure you've heard some stuff about this too, Larry, that the reason why there were so few people to get off of the Kensington Allegheny corridor is because they've moved, they've branched out.
Yeah.
I had a question for you, Vanessa. Larry and I have both heard that part of the reason why there weren't as many people to get off of the street at Kensington and Allegheny is because folks are starting to migrate. Folks had heard that, there were going to be an encampment clear out, and they decided they were going to vote with their feet and go somewhere else, including the side streets of Kensington and Allegheny. Did you hear it? Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah. So last night when I was at the budget town hall, I spoke to outreach workers who said that the police had been there over the last couple of weeks to give out leaflets and to post notices, letting people know. And that also outreach workers from the Office of homeless services had been out there to let people know. I talked to folks from the Sunshine House who said that they had been going around letting people know that this was happening, and letting people know that if they didn't move, that there was a potential to be arrested. One of the unhoused people saw us congregated in front of the Rock Ministries where they had the town hall, and said, "Hey, what's going on? I heard they were arresting everybody tomorrow." And we clarified that no, you're not going to get arrested. What they're trying to do is clear out the people that are living here, that are in tents, that have their belongings here. This person, it's not clear if they were unhoused, but she said, "Oh, well, I'm not going to be around here then." And the outreach worker said, "Yeah, you should probably find another place to go tomorrow." And she said that she was going to leave the area. And then she asked when she should be leaving, which they advised her that last night was probably a good time to go. And so I think that there was a lot of word of mouth communication and on-site outreach to let people know the police were moving in. Of course, there's been an increasing police presence there. So more and more police are posted up along the Kensington corridor. And so I think visibly, people could tell something was going on. And then again, as I drove around the neighborhood and walked around McPherson Square, you could see many people wandering the streets with lots of bags, with blankets, with their belongings, who looked like they previously were on Kensington Avenue and were now displaced to the surrounding streets in the area.
And I just want to reiterate this. No press was allowed. No legal observers were allowed. So the only thing we have to go on is the word of the city, for what that's worth. I just want people to be aware of that. It also appears that the workers who were supposed to go in there and help weren't able to do that. So I don't know what was accomplished here, if anything. I think all that happened was people were dispersed, because we're seeing. I live in West Philadelphia. We've seen in the last couple of weeks more and more people at 30th Street Station, living outside 30th Street Station. I can't help. I apologize for that. I don't know why that keeps happening. But this is what we're seeing across the city, and I still don't know what was accomplished here. I don't understand it.
Yeah, I mean, those numbers to me don't really sound great. If 19 people were connected today, but 5 or 6 dozen people were on Allegheny Avenue, still under the influence, still hanging out, and doing their usual activities of being on the Kensington neighborhood, using drugs, then they need to do work in order to serve those people. It's unclear if those people were engaged. I saw a few folks who were wearing yellow vests. They were posted in stationary positions. The legal collective folks told me that those were L&I workers. So, and seems it might have been operating in a different capacity. Some of the harm reduction workers I saw along Allegheny Avenue did not work with the city. They were volunteers, many of them, with various groups that are out there all the time. And I saw a lot of police there. I saw 3 police officers standing over a woman who was laid flat on the sidewalk. It's unclear if she was hurt or if she overdosed or if she was not even alive. They were standing there for several minutes, I observed, without even touching her or leaned up over her. I talked to harm reduction workers who said that they had to provide Narcan to somebody this morning, again, in front of the police, who did nothing to help them. And that person required 2 to 3 doses of Narcan. So there's still a really large problem. I don't think anybody, including the mayor, believes that this would be solved in one day with these sweeps. But like some of the other sweeps that have occurred over the years, this is certainly not the first place people have posted up, unhoused people in that area. In the past, they've been at the Conrail stations. They've been under some of the bridges along Lehigh Avenue and Emerald Street. And what tends to happen is that people get displaced and they migrate to other areas, including Port Richmond. And I know when I was a resident of Port Richmond, that had happened when Kenny's administration had cleared out those encampments. One of the biggest differences is that police didn't lead those sweeps. It was led by outreach workers, and sanitation workers were the last people to come in to clean up after people had already left, as opposed to coming in. They were the first ones to arrive early this morning to take people's things away. So there's still a lot of work to do and still a lot of unanswered questions in terms of, having the capacity here in shelters and treatment centers to service all these people. And of course, the question of what to do when people refuse treatment, refuse housing, or maybe they go into housing and treatment, but are still unhoused because they have nowhere else to go.
Right. Vanessa, really quick, can you walk us through what happened with that budget town hall last night?
So Mayor Cheryl Parker has been touring the city doing budget town halls where she gives a slideshow or PowerPoint presentation showing the numbers that are proposed in the budget that she has sent to City Council. It's a pretty comprehensive overview of how she intends to spend the money. I think it's pretty useful in showing residents the numbers that are attached to these line items and how she proposes to spend the money. I think it's one of the first times that I've seen a mayor do this in different neighborhoods. And given that Mayor Nutter is a teacher in her past, she does a really good job of explaining how money is generated, how income is generated, how taxes are generated, how money is being used by the federal government that comes into the city. And she, of course, shared details about the public safety plan, which has a very hefty price tag, including $300 million for police. There was elements of plans for SEPTA, for the school district. She shared how the soda tax was being used and how much money that accounted for in the budget. But details were really light on things like the $100 million triage center. So I think there's still a lot of questions around items like that, which are new items in the budget that we haven't seen before, and a lot of good detail about things that are regular expenditures. So she did this in coalition with the Kensington caucus because they were in District 7, and she gave demographic information about District 7 and 6. Present were members of her cabinet and her administration. There were community leaders there. They were hosted at the Block Ministry, so she featured them prominently. Outreach workers from the Block, of course, were working with police this morning to engage unhoused people on the streets. And the police were there. So the police commissioner and other high-ranking executives from the PPD were also there. It was typical Democratic pageantry, if you will, showing all the people supporting her. Of course, there were a lot of missing people from City Council who have a lot of questions about some of these line items, as we saw in Monday's City Council hearing, that they're not satisfied with the level of information being provided by the administration. Parker talked about that to the crowd. She criticized the number of questions that she was getting from community members and the press, especially in regards to the triage center. She said that it was unfair because this was a really new thing and that she's still building the plane while flying it. She also said that they were working out the details. They were planning to share with the public. And one thing that was notable is that she also criticized press's demands to know where the location of the triage centers were. She compared the location of the triage centers to the secrecy of women's shelters and safe houses, and said that that information was not going to be shared to protect the privacy of substance abuse users who would be seeking treatment at those centers, which I find interesting because a methadone clinic, substance abuse treatment centers, sober houses, halfway houses. Those locations are all publicly available. And I also found it interesting because there was a large contingent of people from the Harrogate Civic Association and folks who led the campaign against the safe injection site that was being proposed in South Philly, folks who very adamantly said, we don't want that in our neighborhood. And at the same time, Parker, were saying, we're not going to tell people if these triage centers are going to be in their neighborhood. I wonder how the folks from those groups would react to that, but seemingly they didn't have a negative response, but we'll see as more details develop from the mayor's administration.
Well, and I can tell you, Vanessa, from a couple of good sources around city council, they don't trust the mayor right now. I'm not saying every member, but I have heard from very well-placed sources that they don't have a lot of faith right now in what's happening. And I think an answer like that only contributes to that.
Well, I think that when you are about to ask city council to take out a $100 million loan in the poorest city of its size in America for anything, I don't think it's too much to ask for the citizens to know what you're going to do with that money. And if we saw nothing else from the Philadelphia nursing home thing, where Jeffrey Young, the council member who's in that, whose district that center is in, found out the same way we all found out through the Philadelphia Inquirer that it was being put there. That's not fair. It's not fair to the residents in those areas.
All right. Well,
I was gonna say, that's correct, right? Like, there's zoning that we need to consider. There's buildings. There's a lot of factors. The city put out an RFP on Friday, seeking proposals for management of these triage centers. And I don't know, I think it would be hard for a health provider to want to even submit a proposal when the details of these treatment centers or wellness centers, whatever you want to call them, are pretty light. I would think that as a service provider, you would need a much larger amount of information in order to even consider applying to manage such a big project like that.
All right. Well, Vanessa, thank you so much for joining us. You're going to be on again real soon. There's a lot more to this that's going to happen in one way or another. And we'll hopefully be able to follow it and be able to tell people what's happening. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Now we'd like to bring on Lance Haver, our consumer reporter, to talk a little bit about what he's been following with SEPTA.
Thank you and good evening. I did want to mention, when I was listening to Vanessa and I was at some of the mayor's budget meetings and some of city council members' budget meetings, former council member Janie Blackwell once in public said, I want change, but I recognize that not all change is good. Sometimes we change for the worse, and that's not the type of change that I want. I rather keep things the way they are than make things worse. And as I was listening to you and Vanessa talk about the sweeps and talk about what was happening, I thought of the council members' words. I think it's fair to say nobody is happy with the situation as it was in Kensington. The question is it getting better or worse? Is treating people like this a step forward or is it a step back? And I'll rely upon Vanessa and the two of you to continue to look at that. The other thing when I went to the mayor's budget meeting, it was really much more like a church service or a organizational meeting. People were waving their hands in the air to support her, and she did whatever she could to get people to sign up. So I'm wondering if they're going to be running a campaign, if those people who went to the meetings are going to be getting emails, because she clearly at the budget meeting did a we-they analysis. Those people aren't treating me fairly. They don't understand what it's like to live our lives. They don't understand what it's like to be our grandparents or watch people who are in recovery, who you love and struggle. And so she was definitely positioning herself. And the meeting I went to was in not just Council President Kenyatta Johnson's district, but actually in his own ward. And she really went right after him and what they were doing. And it was really an impressive show of trying to say who has power in this dynamic. So I think what we'll realize is, as we go forward, is whether she's going to run a campaign, whether Mayor Parker is going to run a campaign to try and get her budget passed by going through her organization and through her political structure, rather than just doing what Mayor Kenny did, which was trying to negotiate with city council in private. But that really brings me to SEPTA and what's going on with SEPTA. And I have a slideshow I'd like to bring up, because one of the things that's really happened is the bus revolution, as we know it, has really ended. And they still call it the bus revolution, but the current plan that's being discussed is completely different than what was proposed by the out-of-town consultants. And I think one of the major changes is the consultants are gone. They're no longer at any of the meetings. They no longer make presentations. They're no longer a part of this plan. So what's happened is the consultants love transfers. They wanted everyone to get off the bus and transfer onto another bus or onto the subway or onto something else. Almost all the transfers that were being proposed are gone. Most of the routes are now back to being what they call single seats, which means you get on the bus and you don't have to get off until you're where you want to go. The emphasis on making sure that there are many more bus trips on weekends and our non-traditional usage hours, that emphasis is gone. Instead, the emphasis is on what does the community want, how do people ride the buses. Now, one of the things that has changed is without any of the quote-unquote bus revolution changes, ridership has continued to increase. And SEPTA itself says that we're seeing more and more people get on the bus. So the dramatic need for change that the consultants sold SEPTA on to collect their paychecks doesn't appear to be the case anymore. The consultants were saying, look, ridership is off 66%, and to get it back to where it was, we have to change all the routes because the way people are using the system is different. Well, the consultants did almost all of the research during the COVID shutdowns, when the schools were closed, when businesses were closed. And as a result, their analysis said that we have to change the bus routes for the workers who are going to places that still had to be operating, hospitals, supermarkets, and non-traditional work weeks. So now that the COVID shutdown's over and people are going back to their normal work patterns, bus ridership is up and the need to change that has changed. Most of the routes that were being eliminated because the consultants didn't like them have been put back into effect. Now, it is true that there are still a number of routes that will be eliminated, but the majority of the routes now being eliminated are being eliminated because the ridership on the route was very low. And the final truth for the bus revolution is nobody really knows what it's going to look like. And part of this was a direct response to the council president, the council majority leader, Catherine Gilmore Richardson's fight with SEPTA to make them go back to community groups. It was council member Jones protecting his district from the elimination of what was called the 32 bus and the 27 bus. It was a number of council members standing up and saying, these changes aren't necessarily helpful for us. Just because it fills the need of the consultants and it looks good on paper doesn't mean that it will serve the community. And there was some good news, without a doubt, and that is that underserved parts of the city are going to be getting new lines. The problem is we don't know where that service is going to come from. So even though SEPTA has a $500 million surplus, they have announced that the quote-unquote bus revolution is not going to add an additional hour of service. And because it's going to stay the same number of hours of service, what that means is to add the new service and to reinstate the lines that were cut, they're going to have to cut elsewhere. And we really don't know what that cut's going to be. Here's a quick list of what the changes as a result of the majority leader, Catherine Gilmore Richardson's efforts and the other council members. They're going to restore routes 16 and 32, restore the full length of 57. They're doing some strange things, which is really hard for those people who don't ride SEPTA on a regular basis. SEPTA has both numbered buses and lettered buses. And the explanation for that is that's how they've always done it. And I'm not sure that it makes a lot of sense, but when they change, so they were going to eliminate the H bus. And on paper, they're still eliminating the H bus, but they're bringing the 71 bus. Just happens the 71 bus is exactly the same route as the H bus. So I don't know whether you want to call that an elimination or a change, but it does make it hard for people who have ridden the H bus for years to understand what's happening. They're going to extend the 26 bus back through the way it was going and add on to it the changes. It was called the Wissahickon Transit Center. And again, if you don't follow SEPTA carefully, you may not know, but the Wissahickon Transit Center is basically at the bottom of Roxborough and Mattiunk. And it's going to be a major place to make transfers. Moving buses to there will really open up possibilities. It's a major improvement. They're going to reinstate the Route 12, and they're going to extend the Route 73. So they are going to eliminate the Route 25, but they're going to have the Route 73 do the same route. So I wouldn't exactly say that was a problem. Here's a list of all the routes that are going to be done away with. But again, if you look, you'll see that a fair number of the routes being done away with are the letter routes. And they're not really being, I don't know why they listed it this way. They're really not being done away with. They're just being given numbers. It is true there'll be no more H bus. But I don't know if you ride the bus, whether you really care that much about whether it's called the H or the 73. The majority of the other routes are being eliminated because the ridership is very low and it's almost impossible to justify continuing them. The routes that are being restored because of community outreach are the 16, the 27, the 32, the 49, the 57, and 67. And the reason why I'm listing them, and again, I know I'm going very quickly because we want to hear from the council member. And it's hard unless it's your route to know what this means. But the overall analysis is this was one of the few really successful campaigns where community members and council worked together against an institution to make very positive changes. There's no doubt some of the changes are going to be objected to as we go forward. Not everything is going to work, and I hope SEPTA itself acknowledges that. But this is far better than what was first recommended. It really saves many people from being forced to transfer in communities where the transfer could end up being another 45 minutes to the trip. It eliminates the consultant's decision to force everyone to use the L or the Broad Street line, which again is problematic as you were just talking about what's going on in Kensington. One of the unfortunate truths of that is that it affects SEPTA, and SEPTA's actually hired outreach workers to try and get people out of the stations and out of the L. It has been completely ineffective. I'm not saying that they were wrong to try, and I'm not saying that they are wrong to continue to try. I'm just acknowledging that whatever they're trying has not worked yet. And because I don't know that anybody has a simple solution for a complex problem, other than if you're somebody who doesn't really know anything, and therefore you can be very sure of your opinion. But this is a complex problem, and I think SEPTA deserves credit for attempting to figure out what do we do to help people find other places to live than in the subway stops or the L stops. And unfortunately, the elevators get used as bathrooms. And these are all very unfortunate truths of what desperate people end up doing. And SEPTA is trying to address that. But these route changes that were proposed by the consultants without having any understanding of what Philadelphia was like, the community was like, and what we liked, almost all of the bad ones have been defeated. The community, and with the council's help, has made all these significant changes. And while I'm fearful of what happens because we don't know what's going to be cut so that all these new lines can be added and all these routes can be reinstated, it is because of the public engagement in the process, it is a far better recommendation for changes than what we first looked at. And the other thing is, again, we really don't know what routes are going to be cut. And when you try and go through SEPTA's maps, those of us who were in city council to hear SEPTA make its annual budget request. One of the council members, Councilmember Bass, said at the hearing, well, you just gave me these changes less than an hour ago. I really don't know what to think of them. And when the direct question was asked, well, what's going to be cut so that we can have this additional services? The answer was, well, we haven't really decided yet. So there's some fear going forward. And the biggest fear is the fear that SEPTA doesn't get the funding that it needs from the state. So if I can interrupt my presentation and ask Allison to show that clip of the rally in Harrisburg, and just people, and I was there along with other transit advocates trying to lobby the state legislature for more funding for public transit across the state.
Mr.
Thank
Carrington, who was at the SEPTA board meeting this
I'm sorry,
afternoon.
that's not the right one. So let me just make a brief report. Maybe Allison has it someplace else. Maybe I sent the wrong one. I apologize. There were about 100 people who came from across the state and spoke at the state capitol in support of public transit. And there was a lobbying day. What was interesting was the majority of the people who showed up were from Pittsburgh. And the majority of the people who spoke were from Pittsburgh. The lieutenant governor, who is from Pittsburgh, spoke about the need for more funding for public transit. There were a few Philadelphia legislators who spoke. The union that showed up to speak was the amalgamated workers from the Pittsburgh transit system. And what I thought was really strange was SEPTA didn't send anybody. There was no representative from SEPTA. We were fortunate enough in the morning to run into one of the SEPTA board members who spoke to us about how important it was to lobby for the funds, Dan Meerdoff, who's a SEPTA board member from Montgomery County. But nobody from SEPTA showed up for the rally. None of the TWU workers, the union that's organized the transit workers here in Philadelphia, TWU 235, were not included in the rally. And there were no environmentalists. One of the major components and one of the major reasons to support public transit is it keeps cars off the roads, and it really does a tremendous amount of good for the environment. And there were no environmentalists there. So we have a group of people who are advocating, but it doesn't appear that SEPTA has done what has been done in the past and build a full coalition of all of the people who will have to support public transit. Let me give you one more example. Public transit spends a tremendous amount of money in the state of Pennsylvania, and not a single business person who gets a contract from SEPTA or from the Pittsburgh Public Transit or the public transit from the Lehigh Valley or from Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, from York, or from Dauphin County, not a single business person who has the contract and is making literally millions of dollars showed up to say, if you don't fund public transit, I'm going to have to lay off my workers. And I have my plant, my business in your district, Mr. State Representative, Ms. State Senator. And if you don't vote to fund public transit, you are going to put people in your district out of work. So I think, again, I'm not sure whether in SEPTA's mind, hiring the Republican Party's lawyer, their operative, their Trump supporter, their election denier, is their attempt to lobby Republicans. I don't understand their thinking, but it was very strange to see how much of an effort the Pittsburgh public transit system put in and how little effort SEPTA put in, and how SEPTA, unlike in the past, hadn't gotten anyone from the state AFL-CIO to show up, hadn't gotten anyone from the Philadelphia AFL-CIO to show up, no hospital workers, no hotel workers, none of the airport workers, all of these groups that have to rely upon public transit to get to the work and are organized and represented, and be relatively easy to ask them to show up, were asked to show up and speak. So I'm hoping that they know something that I don't, that they have a head count. When I was talking to legislators, I was told, again, I'm not allowed to say who told me, but I was told I was allowed to say it, that it doesn't look like the Republicans are going to pass the budget on time, that they're purposely going to delay it, and they're purposely going to negotiate. And they are not sure what they're going to negotiate over. Last year, Governor Shapiro gave up on funding for public transit to strike a deal. The hope is that he doesn't do it again this year. But SEPTA's refusal to build that mass space for public transit funding is, in my opinion, is a real weakness. The SEPTA hearings, I'm going to go back to the slideshow. The SEPTA hearings are coming up for the budget. And I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. So I can't seem to go backwards. Excuse me for a second. Thank you. That was it. One more forward. SEPTA has annual budget on both its operating budget, its capital budget. And I want to make notice of how much SEPTA tries to get everybody involved. The budget is, the operating budget hearings at 11 o'clock and 5 p.m. For people who work, they can get to the evening sessions. There's a couple of days. So anyone who's concerned about SEPTA's budget, good news is no fare increase and no service cuts if the governor's funding gets through. Now, I have some bad news to report, and that's about the water rate increase. I did write about it for this week, but I do want to just mention it very quickly in passing. So I do know that the rate board, which appoints the public advocate, and the public advocate serves what the rate board, has said that my reporting was incorrect, that the rate increase isn't going to be $10.46 this year. And so I just thought best to get the facts out. This comes from the Philadelphia Water Department's presentation for the budget. Because I intervene in the case and I'm a participant, I get this ahead of it. Here you see where they say, yes, the current budget, this current bill is $740.81. They want to raise it to $85.27. That's a $6.03 increase in what's called the base rates and a $4.43 increase in the bills for a total increase of $10 to $10.46, $125 a year, 11% increase. So I'm not quite sure why the public advocate thought that I was wrong. The efficacy, how efficient the system is, there are professors, people with PhDs who spend their lives studying these type of programs. I'm not sure how helpful it is for a professor to just study it and not show up and testify, but that's their decision. So there is a professor at University of Wisconsin in Madison at the Lafayette School of Public Policy, which is supposed to be very prestigious. Whether it is or it isn't, I can't say, who studies what's this our low-income plan and says it's incredibly inefficient, it's incredibly expensive, and it costs far more for poor people for this plan than if we switch to another plan. So it's part of what's called discovery, because legally the Water Department doesn't have to answer my questions as a reporter, but if I participate in the case, I have a right to ask for discovery. And so I asked about comparing what it costs Philadelphia to enroll someone in a low-income plan versus what the industry standard is. And I said, please provide the industry standard for enrolling a consumer in a low-income program. This professor saying we cost us way more than what it should. The Water Department's response was they object. They don't want to answer the question. The department objects to this discovery request on the grounds that the discovery sought will cause unreasonable annoyance, burden, and expense to the department. This discovery request is seeking information and documentations that are neither relevant nor material to the 2024 TAP-R filing. The industry standard for enrolling a consumer in a low-income program is not relevant and not material to the PWD proposed changes in rates and charges as set forth. Now, I know I'm laughing a little bit because the other part is just to start screaming and pulling out the few hairs I have left. It's just incredible that the Water Department says it doesn't matter how much it costs us to run the program. It's immaterial. And the public advocate doesn't ask. Now, the final insult, of course, and I'm going to go to the hearings and I'll report again next week, but the final insult, and I called attention to our viewers, SEPTA has a day hearing and a night hearing. The Water Department, now SEPTA has no proposed increase this year, no proposed route cutbacks. there are some questions about how they use the budget. We heard their general manager and city council say they're not going to have enough bus drivers this year. There's no way they're going to fill all their vacancies. And they're hoping by next year they'll be close to it. So there's some legitimate questions to be asked, but no rate increase, no service cuts. 4 hearings, 2 during the day, 2 during the night in public. The water department, which will be had the 4th consecutive year of rate increases. Rates have gone up by over 25%. Their hearing is only during the day and only virtual. So anyone who wants to show up with a sign and saying, don't raise my rates, can't. The beauty of what they're getting away with, again, the agreement of the public advocate, is to shut out public participation. If you don't have access to Zoom, you can't go to the hearing. If you can't get off during the day at 10 o'clock in the morning, you can't participate. And if you feel better about holding up a sign than testifying, you can't participate. So that, just to keep in mind, City Council objected to SEPTA's poor job of outreach, but is silent about the complete lack of outreach. I have asked the public advocate how many groups they met with before they decided to approve of this rate increase. I'm waiting for an answer. I'm expecting them to say it's not relevant.
Yeah.
But on paper, right there in front of us, is them saying, yes, we have to raise rates once again. So that's my report. I'll be back. I hope people who are concerned about water rates make an attempt to get to the hearing. I know it's very difficult. 10 o'clock on a Friday, if you're a working person, very hard to get the time off. SEPTA, I will say, I will be at the hearing. One, I enjoy asking the questions, but I will say honestly, most of the news for SEPTA this year is good news, assuming that Governor Shapiro comes through with the funding, in which case SEPTA will have $500 million that it can spend on things that we need.
All right. Well, Lance, thank you very much. We're looking forward to that next week. So now let's jump right into our interview with Council Member Kendra Brooks. All right, Councilmember Kendra Brooks, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Larry and Denise.
So the first thing we'd like to talk about, tell us about your trip abroad. What was the impetus for going over there, and what kind of things did you learn about?
Oh, great. So it was an amazing experience, definitely life-changing. I was invited by a group called Power Switch Action. I believe they're out of Chicago, to join a delegation of community groups and city council members from Council Member Gautier and myself from Philadelphia, 2 council members from Nashville, Tennessee, someone from California, 2 different places in California, and a contingent from the mayor's office in Chicago. So that's the group that we went, and we just went to learn more about what's social housing, to actually meet with folks who have created social housing in both Vienna and Berlin, and kind of get the understanding the government's role in creating social housing in both regions, and just do a comparison between what we see here in the States and in Europe.
And what is social housing specifically?
So social housing is government subsidized housing for all people. So, when we think of public housing, is what we call it here, it's just for low income people. But in the European countries that we studied, the majority of their folks are renters. So social housing is a construct where, housing is just affordable for everyone. So in some of the housing developments that we went to visit, we had government ranking officials living in the same complex with, people on fixed income, senior citizens, and it was a shared community experience. And yeah, it was very interesting. And Vienna was like utopian, which was a little scary. I had a deja vu moment. I was telling Kathleen, because I grew up in Rochdale Village. When I was younger, we lived in Mitchell-Liam housing development, which was a co-op. And it brought me back to those days when I was a child in New York, living in the co-op model here in the United States.
So how are they able to do that in Vienna?
Well, the government subsidized the cost of the land. So the one in Vienna was built on an old airstrip that was government owned. The government was allowed to subsidize the land for development, and also subsidize the money with low to no interest loans to folks that were developing on this particular land. And with the co-op model, people pay equally into this housing that they are a part of, and it's transferable. So if you decide to move to a bigger flat, as they call it, you have the ability to take some of the money that you invested into it to another flat somewhere else.
So is this the kind of thing where there's a program like this? It would seem to me, and based on what I've read, poverty is brought under control a little bit more. There's certainly less homelessness because there are these facilities. And then that frees up funding for other things. Am I wrong on that?
No, absolutely. What we learned is that European governments put their money where their mouth is. So if housing is a human right, they've created the circumstance where housing is a human right. And people are afforded safe, stable housing at every level. And it's a part of their public infrastructure, just like roads, water, and electricity. It's kind of a completely different, thought process than how we think about housing here in the States.
And that's one of the really interesting points about this. And not to get too far into it, but why do we have a different outlook here in the United States that is clearly not designed for everybody?
Yeah, I mean, this country was built on a us versus them. So I think let's start there. But I think the significant is that investing in housing is a part of their social construct and not stigmatizing people for being poor. But that's what we do here, in the States. And I think, we come from very segregated society, but there is less segregation because, everyone lives together, whether you're wealthy or well off, is like community. And you can feel it when you're in these spaces, and I keep, when I talk about this, I link this to public transportation because public transportation is the same. It was accessible, clean, readily available, and it was the way of living on one of these housing developments that we visited called the Sea Sunk. You couldn't drive within the initial housing construct. Parking was along the outside and public transportation was readily available, and everyone seemed to be using public transportation. It wasn't a very car friendly society. And I think like the separation between, the have and the have nots isn't as noticeable, in these communities that I saw. And I think that was still very mind blowing to me. Because some folks worked at the shops and lived in these same apartment buildings and they were very nice. One of the sites we went to visit, they had 36 units, a rooftop entertainment space, a garden, yoga room, sauna, and a library as part of their complex. And there are multiple all over, and they're owned by various entities. Some of them are part of a what is it? Limited. They're part of a community that came together to build the housing. Some of them may be owned by businesses like a bank or insurance company that created this construct for, the people that work within their companies.
All right. We would like to thank Councilmember Kendra Brooks for being with us. We will play the rest of that interview next week on the show, the continuation of that. And we will see you next week on Hall Monitor. Thank you.